Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Logtech Live. Pleased to be joining you, as you can see from the dusky lighting outside my window, from New Delhi, India. As many of you know, that's where I decamp for the summer. Super excited about today's episode. I'm always excited, but I'm really excited, obviously, about today's episode. I'm going to introduce our guest today in just a second. If this is your first time joining, welcome to the show. Really glad you could join us. If you've caught episodes before, always appreciate the support. I literally only do this show, not just this episode, the whole show, because of you. So I'm really glad if you're joining us for a repeat time, and hope you get as much value from this episode as you have from previous ones. A lot to cover today. It's despite it being sort of the dog days of summer. Is it the dog days of summer? I guess that's like more August, but it's so hot everywhere. It's crazy. I'm calling it the dog days of summer right now. It's been newsy. Like there's strikes going on everywhere in North America. That's been dominating the news. We're still trying to figure out if the Trans-Pacific is going up or down. We're trying to figure out if Asia, Europe lane is recovering or not. And in the background, there's obviously relevant to me and our show, there's been lots of stuff, interesting stuff going on in the world of technology, which I will get to in a second. But before I do, as always, I've got a couple things to plug. Inland Distribution Conference is happening in like 2 months. It's crazy. I've been talking about this for, I think, 5 months. We're only eight or 9 weeks away. So if you've not registered, please do. I can guarantee you there is not a single conference in the entire vast array of conferences covering the logistics world that digs deeper into the world of U.S. surface transportation. First of all, my two colleagues, Ari Ash and Bill Cassidy, the hardest two working guys in the trucking business, they put together a program unlike any other. It's got substance. It has the biggest names in the industry. And I will be leading, as usual, a whole bunch of technology-led focused tracks, around AI, around TMS, we have a lot of good speakers. So, and if you tune into this show, you're going to want to see the panels that I'm leading at Inland. So there's still time to register, obviously, still time to book your hotel. So really hope to see you in Chicago, and that's September 25th through 27th. A couple months later, I will also be in Abu Dhabi for the World Ports Conference, which is held by the International Association of Ports and Harbors, or IAPH. So please also consider registering for that if you are involved in the maritime world or terminal operations, or just want to get smarter about that space. Again, similar, the most robust kind of comprehensive conference covering all of the things that matter to that world. And again, I'll be leading a whole bunch of sessions, I think 6 or 7 at last count, around digitalization and automation in ports. So you're not going to want to miss that. That's over Halloween. It's like October 31st through November 2nd in Abu Dhabi. A little more exotic than Chicago, I will admit. But a little farther away also, so I understand the travel considerations. Anyway, hope to see you there. Hit me up if you need or want a discount code to either of those events. And I can get those to you. Lastly, before we move on to news of the week, I don't care if you're tired of hearing me say this, I'm going to keep saying it. Support the Blended Pledge. This is if you've not heard of this, this is an initiative that Sarah at Let's Talk Supply Chain has started that helps to get more diverse voices at industry events. A lot of times people are invited to speak at events and don't have the budget internally or through the event to travel, so they're picked because they are deserving of being there and on their merit, but they don't have the budget to actually make it happen. So Blended Pledge is raising money to create a fund to help support those travel costs or underpin those travel costs. So it's a great cause. Someone take ownership of this, A, because it's a great cause, and B, so I can stop saying this and move on to something else. Okay? All right, news of the week. I said it was newsy. Few stories to highlight. So I did a column earlier this week about overhiring in the logistics technology sector. And, you know, I hope this wasn't something that like slapped people on the side of the head by surprise, right? I've gotten a bunch of feedback in both directions, probably more sort of agreeing with the tone of the column, but essentially what we were trying to argue here is, all the companies that hired a ton based on huge funding rounds over the pandemic, when there was tons of money coming from the venture capital world, a lot of them have had to cut. And, some of them have been minor cuts. Some of them have been fairly significant. Some of them have been quite significant. All of them indicate that too many people were hired too quickly. And where the fault lies is interesting, but sort of incidental to the reality that companies had too many people, especially in sales and marketing and HR and roles that were meant to sort of support rapid growth rather than focus on building the product and making the product better and aligning that growth with kind of the way the logistics industry works, which is sort of slow and meditative, I guess. I don't know. That's probably not the right word, but really methodical is the word I was looking for in terms of the decision-making process about investing in solutions, right? Because some of these things can be quite disruptive to an organization, and most companies are not inclined to put a credit card down and sort of transform their operation overnight. So take a peek at this column. Let me know what you think. I think it's a really important piece of the puzzle in terms of where the market is right now. It's not just about diminished demand in the market. It's a little bit about some of the, there's decisions made when money was flowing fast. So next story, also really interesting development. Probably not the most interesting development that could have happened here, but I think the most likely one. So I wrote about a year ago, and we've talked about it on this show, DAT and Convoy, DAT being a trucking load board and data provider, and Convoy being a freight broker, sued one another. Convoy was a customer of DAT. DAT accused Convoy of creating a competitive load board using data that they weren't supposed to. Convoy countersued, saying DAT has a monopolistic position in the market and imposes their will sort of on the market. As my friend Matthew Leffler, the armchair attorney, trucking transportation attorney extraordinaire, predicted after the first lawsuits came to light, this was always going to settle. Neither company wanted it to see the inside of the courtroom, and that's what happened this week. Confidential settlement. We're not going to find out the resolution of this beyond that they've sort of downed weapons and are going back to business as usual. I think it's interesting from the perspective of the industry was sort of waiting to see if there might be something that came of this, especially on Convoy's suit against DAT, simply because there are people in the industry who feel, have the same sort of sentiment as Convoy does about DAT's position. But, it's not my place to sort of determine, who has an appropriate place. The courts were going to make their call if it got that far, but it didn't. They settled. So we're sort of back to square one on some of this stuff, which I think all in all is probably a good thing. All right, last story to highlight is wrote about Graham Parker, who founded a company called Containers a few years ago. That company sort of essentially helped forwarders and carriers build their sort of e-commerce digital quoting storefront, for lack of a better term. Eventually ended up selling to Descartes a couple of years ago. The period that he agreed to stay with Descartes expired, and he's now back. This time, instead of selling to the service providers, he's built a business called ShipAngel that is focused on providing rate management tools to the BCOs. Very interesting, just because of his history, but also because that segment is relatively untapped. And it may be untapped for a good reason, not because companies haven't thought about that being an opportunity, but it may just be an opportunity that's difficult to convince shippers to invest in, especially shippers who have people on staff who are really good managing spreadsheets. They may not need a system to help manage them in the same way that an NVO or a forwarder does, because we've seen a lot of traction for those types of tools within the forwarder and NVO community. So definitely something interesting to watch. And that, along with a whole bunch of new funding rounds, including a few that I've written just in the last week and a half, from WaveBL, Raft, Nuvo Cargo, and earlier this week, Sedna Systems, all have gotten pretty sizable $30+ million funding rounds. So it seems like the deep freeze on VC is thawing a little bit. So that's another thing to watch in that market. Okay, it's now time to bring my guest on. And this week, I'm super excited to be joined by Heidi Benko, who's VP of Products and Solutions at Infor Nexus. Heidi, so glad you could join us today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Awesome. So just as background for me, and I will let you go into background on Infor Nexus for the, probably 5% of people who are watching who've never heard of it before. My background with Infor Nexus, formerly GT Nexus, goes back a really long time. I started covering GT Nexus probably a year or two after I started covering the world of logistics. So it's very interesting to talk to you today, Heidi, because I feel like my path in sort of understanding the world of logistics has been colored to some extent by knowing people from Infor Nexus all along the way. So really excited to talk about that and sort of where you are in the market today. But first, Can you give people a little background on yourself and sort of what led you to Infor Nexus? Formerly, you were there when it was GT Nexus, right? So
yeah, actually, I started on the trade card side, even.
Right, that's right.
Global trade. So way back in, now the years are long, so I realized November 24 years. So
and the trade card acquisition. So that was a company that was essentially merged with GT Nexus, and I want to say that was like 2013.
Exactly. Yep.
Right. Okay. So good. My memory is better about that than
actually,
what I'm supposed to, like my list of chores around the house. So cool. Okay. So give us background on before you joined Trade Card, and then since you were at Trade Card and to today.
Yeah. So prior to Trade Card, I was working in banking and brokerage, and in kind of an internal audit consulting type role on how do we improve business processes. And then I had, a good friend at Trade Card that was just to start off, trying to automate global trade finance, right? And it's like, how do you help us build these processes? So that's how I made the switch. And I've been there 24 years in many roles, mainly product management, solutions strategy, solutions consulting, flipping back and forth. And then, as you said, Trade Card and GT Nexus merged in 2013. We were acquired by Infor in 2015. So we rebranded as Infor Nexus in 2019. So a lot of people still go GT Nexus. They recognize that, but
it's difficult. I sometimes, I'm guilty of this as well. It's like, the name you identify the company with initially, it's hard to get past that name. So especially when it's somewhat close, but
right.
Very interesting and super interesting to hear kind of that you've had experience sort of like touching more of the internal engineering product side, and then also very much the customer facing side. I'm not that they're always mutually exclusive, but like the focus. So that must give you a good, like, well-rounded kind of view of linking those two things.
Yeah, definitely.
What so for as I said, for the probably two people who are tuned in who've never heard of Nexus
I don't know who we are.
Who is that? Who is Infor Nexus?
Yeah.
How does it fit into the broader Infor family?
Yeah.
And who are your customers typically?
Yeah. So Infor Nexus, we're a supply chain business network. So what we do is we connect companies to all their extended network partners, right? So whether it's suppliers, contract manufacturers, carriers, brokers, even banks, right? Forwarders, to really manage, those processes that are multiple party, right? So to create that visibility, collaboration, and execution, everything from managing, procure to pay of direct materials, and how do you book your shipments? How do you track the shipments? How do you get visibility to that inventory and orders all throughout the supply chain? And then how do you manage that invoice payment process, like bringing all that together in a single platform? So trying to optimize the flow of goods, but also the flow of capital. And our customers have always been, really companies that really have complex supply chains. How do you connect all that network in order to make it seamless, right? To get that visibility and collaboration, and everything from retail, fashion apparel, industrial manufacturing, machinery, high tech. We have customers like Caterpillar, Ecolab, Burton Snowboards, Levi's. So, companies with really complex global supply chains that are trying to run at the speed of business today. To your point on Infor, as I mentioned, we were acquired in 2015 because, the then CEO, Charles Phillips, understood the importance of a network. If you're really going to gain end-to-end visibility and orchestration of supply chains, you need a network. So we connect our ERPs in order to provide that visibility to their network and better collaboration and execution. But, Infor Nexus itself, still very ERP agnostic. Most of our customers use SAP, Oracle, and other ERP systems.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch. I was going to ask about that because I would imagine the ideal situation is for Infor is if they're already using ERP and they can just plug you in. But obviously, a lot of other companies are deeply married to a different ERP and they still might want to use some or all of what you offer. So.
They'll need a connected network, right? Absolutely.
Yep. Super interesting. Okay, so let's start with something that is very top of mind for me right now because I've been writing a lot about it over the last couple months, but also, works historically for me because when I first encountered then GT Nexus, they were sort of one of this upcoming group, very small group of companies that were really promoting the idea of like global end-to-end supply chain visibility. Which wasn't, I guess it wasn't new, theoretically new, but like the way you were addressing it through cloud-based system, very distributed kind of idea of like where this information could come from, but having a single place where everyone agreed it was that data point that they all needed to work around. That was a fairly new concept. So what sort of, why I guess my question is, and this correlates to my stories that I've written the last couple of months. We are 16 years since I first started writing about GT Nexus and visibility. And yet I'm still writing stories about shippers being a little underwhelmed with their experience. Why do you think this has been so difficult to figure out?
Yeah, no, I know. And I scratch my head sometimes too, but, I think not everybody went to tackle the hard problems early, right? So, focusing more on that outbound domestic piece, right? And connecting, everybody still thought, to manage my global supply chains and get visibility from all those partners, Excel, like you mentioned Excel earlier on a process. And I was like, no, you can't function on Excel and email anymore, right? So, but it was working for a while, but it's clearly not anymore. Everybody understands, with all the disruption going on and able to sense and respond if there's a problem. Do I have inventory in the right place? That takes that connected network and visibility, right? So you can't use spreadsheets. And, every supply chain survey, it's still one of the number one things companies are still looking for is visibility. But It does take connecting to those parties, and particularly global supply chains, right? International, it's not just, and I think some folks think, it's just tracking, right? That in transit, where is it? So much, if you think about, ocean visibility or international, what's going on at origin, right? What's going on there before it even ships, right? If you really want agility, you have to get further upstream. You can make more choices before it's actually in motion. And that requires a lot of connectivity to the different parties, different ways to connect. Not everybody has APIs, EDI, some you have to enter in the system, some mobile. You need all these different ways to connect. And then, as you said, bring it all together so everybody's looking at that same data and information at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, to that last point, I'm sitting here in India, and it's crazy how much of the business world here, even sophisticated companies, are essentially communicating key pieces of data or key like milestones via WhatsApp, right? Like that is the system of record for a lot of business networks within India. So to your point, it can't be, you can't force people to use something that they don't see an incentive to use. So you have to sort of adapt if you want to be able to connect to them. Well, okay. So you sort of alluded to something that I actually wanted to ask you about.
Mm-hmm.
I will admit whenever I hear the word end-to-end supply chain visibility, I have to stifle an eye roll when someone says that to me, because I've heard it so many times over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And people, even if they can define it well, I don't feel like they always have the ability to execute what they're telling me they do. When Infor Nexus talks to customers or prospective customers about what end-to-end supply chain visibility is, what does that mean? And then go into how do you actually do it, as opposed to like a single mode or just like pure transportation visibility, even if it's cutting across modes.
Yeah, because there's even, you could have, if you think about end-to-end transportation visibility is just, global end-to-end with across the modes, right? But when I think about end-to-end visibility, it's, from the origin to the destination, and I want visibility to the order process and the shipment process and the items. And then truly end-to-end is in and out as well, right? So where's this overall product flowing if it's going through and then to my customer, right? So that's giving end-to-end. But, mostly it's, I think, from origin to destination, from the beginning, and seeing all those events from all those order processes, like particularly if it's inbound supply chains, right? So what's going on at my supplier contract manufacturer, right? All those events, what's going on at origin, what's going on in transit.
So basically when the PO is cut from that point on, is that fair to align that with?
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that's in bringing it in one place. And then, so there's kind of the movement of it, but then end to end is I can see my supply and my demand side. So the status of my supply coming in against demand, do I have enough? And that's what I meant. Probably shouldn't have said in and out, but end of day, what I want to know is if I have things coming into my DC going to my customers, are things coming in time to deliver? Or if I'm going to produce the product, is it coming in time that I can meet, again, the customer order? So to me, end to end is what is the inbound effect on my end customer delivery, and do I have enough? So you have to bring in more signals. So not just POs, but sales orders and forecasts into a single place. So when you're looking at end-to-end inventory, you know where it is in transit, what's on hand, what's due to be produced, and what's going out to the customer, which takes a lot of connections, right?
That was just what you said was super complicated, and my Friday night brain is like not really capable of understanding how that all comes together. Well, so I mean, that's my question is, I think if there's probably, I could go on Google right now and probably find 10,000 companies that are promising to do exactly what you said.
Totally. Yep.
Where 3PL, even an ocean carrier probably is promising that to me now. How is it difficult to execute on that idea or promise?
Yeah. I think it's difficult, but there's a staged process as well, right? So some of the things on end-to-end visibility and some of the purpose of end-to-end visibility is really, it's a change in the way you're running supply chains, right? Instead of in the silos, hey, I've got my transportation team managing what's in transit. Oop, there's a problem. Let me reach out to my planning team. How's inventory, right? The goal of end-to-end is everybody's looking at that information at the same time, right? Everybody's getting the answers they need at the same time. So you need that all in a single place. You need that data. It's end-to-end because you're pulling the data from all the points, if you will. To the end of day, again, to customer service, what's going on with my customer order? Where is it? What's the status? And even getting it produced. So to do that, it's about connecting those parties into a single place and having the right data, right? So I need the right data from the orders, because end of day, what's the items on the orders? What are the customers on the orders? What's the status of that in the shipments, right? So looking at it, you have to manage the order, I think, is a real key point, right? Just having a shipment and reference to the order is not enough. If there's a problem, you need to be able to drill down super quick on what items, what customers, what date. Also, a lot of things we're seeing on, end-to-end is getting all the data in the right place. So, pulling data from the transportation systems and the rating. What's the cost of the freight, right? So end-to-end is one place to manage it versus swivel chair, right? So if I've got, for instance, containers sitting in a port. Which ones do I move first? Well,
Yeah.
if I have freight information right there in my hands, I know to do that. So it's kind of a single place for all that data as well.
Okay, so that's probably a good place for me to jump back in and touch on another of my favorite topics, which is, and frankly, I think as we've seen the visibility sector, sort of the sort of standalone visibility sector, I'll call them, struggle a bit with a little bit of dip of freight demand and the less urgency to invest in solutions that are just about like, where is my stuff across modes. I've heard a lot of people talk about, well, we need to influence decisions. This data can't sit out of context of the fact that a business is making a decision based on the information. It's not just a that's interesting, right? So how, and just as further background, a decade ago, I remember doing a study about visibility, and we found that, something like 2/3 of people were using visibility for monitoring and not for decision making. I suspect that would change significantly this time, but I suspect A, it still wouldn't be 100%, and B, a lot of people who say they're making decisions based on visibility are having to do it in the way you described it, not sort of in an integrated way. So Nexus, I think of as a company that is not just visibility, but you can actually do something in the same suite with that visibility. Why is that an advantage?
Why is that what? Sorry, I didn't hear last part.
An advantage.
100%. I mean, the point of visibility isn't just to know where it is. The point is it on time? Can I promise my customer it's on time? And if it's not on time, what do I need to do about it? All those things, that's what visibility, you have to connect to get that, but you don't want to just monitor, is it on time? Is it on time? You want to be told, if it's on time, fine, I don't have to do anything, right? But if it's not, what do I need to do? And then that whole, in making decisions on if something's late, what do I need to do about it? Do I have enough stock elsewhere, right? Do I have to swivel chair to get that information? As I mentioned, even the freight container example, okay, well, I'm going to run into detention and demurrage issues. Which ones do I prioritize pulling in the freight? So we see more and more companies, because if like you're using the spreadsheet process, you can't get to decision making. By the time you've got the data, it's too late to make decisions. And for companies that actually do understand that they're pulling in, again, the data, you have the shipping data, you have the orders, it's all in one place, you're able to make better decisions. You're able to, shift inventory we need it, get it to where it needs to be, better costs, all of that. So definitely about decision making.
Yeah, and I think I want to just sort of put that in context of, I can remember, again, I sort of date myself with all these references back, but 12, 13 years ago, if you went to a Gartner conference, or if you were just reporting on this business, it was all about, do I use a single suite or do I use best of breed? It was called back then. And now it's all like, oh, tech stack, right? Everyone talks about tech stack as opposed to best of breed, right? The things you're describing to me, that integrated ability to take the data from the system and make decisions about them, is the argument for using as much as you can a single suite of tools that are already connected. To what extent is that an advantage over? Because I report a lot about companies doing really interesting work on the integration side and making those best of breed promises from 12 years ago a little bit more realistic for a company to manage. What's the remaining advantage of like the single suite approach versus that approach, since that's more of an option to me now than it was 12 years ago?
Yeah, just having it all in one place for all those different users, and it's the visibility to make decisions, but then also to execute as well and collaborate, right? So, our platform, as I mentioned at the beginning, is to provide visibility, collaboration, and execution, right? So let's just say an order is running late. Can I collaborate with my supplier on it, right? Or I need to reprioritize a container, my forwarders, right on the platform, right? So there's that execution component. But also, because it's all end-to-end in a single place, you're managing the orders, you're managing the shipments, you're managing the inventory. That's part of the process. It's not a separate solution where you're capturing the data to analyze it, get visibility and insights. Again, it's that execution one. So they're combined. So you're getting both, right? I'm executing, and visibility comes out of the processes, right? Getting a shipment booked, that's visibility. Did it book on time, right? Or not book on time, right? As part of that versus a system over here kind of monitoring and providing insights, but you can't really do anything out of it. And it's more connection points as well, right? So you mentioned, how do you get partners to do it? It's the same platform you're already booking the shipments, the same platform you're creating the invoices, getting paid, et cetera.
So that data transfer is already innate in the
part of the process.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, that's, I think, a good way for people to maybe think about the differences in a single suite approach versus trying to tie visibility onto another suite. So very interesting. Okay, I have so much to ask you, and I'm already running out of time. So let me try to move a little quicker. I had mentioned PO management. It seems to me all the upheaval in supply chains during the pandemic sort of brought to the surface the idea that PO management was actually kind of important, and you couldn't just take for granted that. I've said a million times on this show and elsewhere that, like, people have gotten so good at logistics that moving stuff from the other side of the world became like a utility rather than something that actually is challenging. And I think that's why PO management, it never went away, but people just sort of took it for granted, and it resurfaced as, oh no, actually there can be huge variances between supply and demand at a moment's notice, and we don't have the ability to track that. So have you seen that as well? How are you kind of helping your customers address that reemergence of this? Or has it just been sort of, kind of a key thing for Nexus customers all along?
Well, it's always been a key thing, right? Because we've always had both the shippers and the forwarders really manage that origin operations. And so, some of the key things we've done for years is it's a shared view to that PO management, right? So that way, if you're managing the same information, there's certain things that if it's a problem, the shipper's like, okay, the supplier's proposing really early, right? They can't meet the expectations. I'll collaborate and deal with that. Versus, okay, the forwarder making sure it's getting booked, the shipments are going out, like the shared visibility is that. That's kind of always day one. But what we've seen more and more is that upstream, if you will, visibility. What's going on at the supplier process? What's going on with production? How do we get visibility to that? Because end of day, if it's not going to ship on time, getting it out delivery, that ETA, if you will, from the shipment point, it's already a problem, right? So we see more and more companies, and that's another process that's full of spreadsheets, is every week, Monday, everybody, suppliers, tell me, how are you doing on these order items? Then I get it back Friday. Wait, it's Monday already. So I lack visibility, I lack agility. And so many companies want real time, just, I want those updates immediately. And how does that impact my ability to deliver? So we're seeing a lot more of that and emphasis on that.
Yeah, very interesting. And I mean, I know there's a lot of 3PLs that sort of offer their own tools, and probably some of them are white labeling your solution as well. On that, what would you, to keep kind of this theme going, what would you say the comparative advantage of an approach of taking kind of a standalone, no, I'm using Nexus to manage all my 3PLs versus, no, I'd rather have a 3PL that innately knows what they're doing on this system, manage it for me?
I mean, we see both, really, and it's that flexibility, right? And it's kind of both. It depends on, some of our shippers have local operations, right? So they may take on more versus I don't, and I'm going to let my 3PL do that, right? So it's really, we do see a mix. I do think there is something about the shared visibility that we see from companies that really does help, because everybody sees if there's a problem and the shipper and the supplier collaborate and agree on something new, I know immediately as a 3PL what to do. Like, we're just all in sync on that. So we definitely see all sorts of, it just depends on how the companies are organized, and
every shipper is different. Even in the same size, same vertical as a competitor, they'll have totally different views on things.
Depends on how your operation
stops being fascinating to me.
What?
It never stops being fascinating to me how, like, each company is like an organism, right? It leads its own life. So let me sort of segue now into, I think, what's related, and this is probably more to your background, even pre the Nexus trade card merger, is supplier management, right? Which has obviously been a focus of Nexus for a long time. How every importer is drastically different from every other importer. Every supplier, there's probably that much more difference in terms of their technological capability, their
Yes.
their attitude toward collaborating, right, with a single buyer on the other side. How do you sort of use technology to normalize that for an importer?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's, the main users of our platform are on the supplier side, for
Okay.
sure. And they're all different levels of sophistication. So, hey, if we can integrate with you directly, that's possible. Or do you do a CSV upload, or you keying information into the platform? And for many suppliers, we're that system of record, creating the orders and the ASNs. But it's also providing better visibility to them of their customer orders and order changes and things like that, right? So it's not just, oh, I'm doing updates. We give them the tools too, because there's a lot of changes coming from the buyer, like what's critical, what I need to act on, and tools making the updates easier. And then, we have some, certainly by industry, where we have a supplier and a lot of their customers, they only log in once. So it's a network. It's not, a portal platform. So the supplier can look at all their supplier orders, all their customer orders, do all their shipments on a single place. And it's also a platform they can get paid on in supply chain finance. So there's value points as well. And it, from just supplier, if you think about the mass numbers, I mean, we have had global feet on the street since the beginning. We understood that we had to really make that, available to, if they have to call and they have a problem, for instance. So a large majority of the Nexus staff is focused on onboarding and supporting all those suppliers.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, the importer Nexus customer has a view of, I need to manage all of my suppliers and my transportation providers and banks and whoever else might be connected in terms. The supplier view on the system is the inverse. I need to manage all of the different buyers and some of those same partners who help convey to those buyers. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yes, in a single view. Yeah.
Single view. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Versus, okay, I've got buyer A over here, and let me log into buyer, B over there, right? It's making it easier for them. And the number of processes, that's the other thing. We keep expanding over the years. There's so many processes that a company deals with the supplier that are spreadsheets and email. It's not just orders, invoices, shipments, it's forecasts, it's, all the surveys for ESG compliance, all of that. How do I do that in one place versus, oh, here's your procure to pay system, oh, here's your supply chain finance system, over here's where you're going to book the shipments. You just make that easier and be that operating platform for your suppliers.
Especially, I would imagine, on the supplier side, where they don't probably have a huge team to manage the system, and it needs to be very simple, right?
Simple, intuitive, easy, fast. Like some of the tools just make it easier to create things, and it's more accurate, right? Because we're reusing, here's the order, scan and automatically pack, create the ASN, that creates the invoice, right? It's reducing all that burden, making it more accurate. That also helps make sure the documents are clean, you're getting paid on time, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's broaden out a bit. You mentioned ESG. I don't think we'd mention AAI in this conversation. I'm not going to mention it right now because that's a whole nother conversation. We have just a few minutes left. But I did want to talk about kind of digital transformation. I mean, we surveyed people earlier this year, or S&P, sister part of S&P did a whole survey about the logistics industry and focusing on digital transformation. What can you kind of talk pragmatically about digital transformation, about where it's happening, where it's not, where people may think it is, but it's actually not? Because I think that's kind of a key thing. And I say that because I think there's an assumption that every company has a digital transformation process ongoing. And I think some people are thinking something very simple is the first step to that. And some people are thinking very advanced, how do I automate X, Y, and Z in 5 years? So just give us a flavor of what you're kind of seeing in the market.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I would say, it definitely varies by company. Some you've got like a really, strategic thinking chief supply chain officer has the plan, right? And to transform, it's not like overnight, but we have to run our supply chain differently. So we're going to start with these areas, right? And how are we going to make each one? And part of that transformation, again, is that single view of the data and end to end. And there's supply chain, but also finance too, right? CFOs are leading transformation in finance and the whole invoice payables process and even broader. And then other companies, you hear that and you're like, oh my gosh, transfer, almost like, where do I start? Right. And it's really, I think part of it is to get people to just like think differently. We have to think about supply chain processes differently, right? We can't run them the way we did before. Things have changed, right? The new normal, there's a lot of chaos. We need to be able to respond quickly, manage our inventory. So it has to be a data-driven process. And I do see a lot of, again, people will get that, right, in different areas. So they may start with, the visibility component, like how do we connect the carriers and get rid of the spreadsheets? That way we have the real-time data to get into our planners to make sure, what are true lead times? What's the status of the product? Simply like that. We're seeing a lot of companies that are going very broad and inbound supply that I want to connect my whole network from that order all the way in. And they're just saying, let's do all of it. Let's get all these connections now because they see that they need it, right? So we are seeing kind of a mix. And I do think I like, thinking differently. We've got kind of Coke has our principle-based management. One of the things is creative destruction. Like we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So you always have to replan and rethink today. I think that's kind of a mentality now supply chain professionals need to think about. How do we do it differently and better every time? What's available for us to do that as well?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think as you were talking about this, I was thinking about how I'm in the middle. I think I've mentioned this on the show. I'm in the middle of a house renovation right now. And to me, this is like one of those projects where like I don't even know where to start. There's so much to be done. I don't know and then you get into it and you're like, well, we need a 2-inch filler between this cabinet and this cabinet, and this this vanity is wrong for the plumbing that we have, and it's stuff that the nitty-gritty stuff that totally impacts the way the thing looks and the cost. And you need someone, and in our case, it's partially my wife and partially the contractor, who can kind of like see through the noise and like just make step by step by step and get you to the place where you have a house that looks nice, and that's your digital transformation. So that's my very terrible analogy for the day, but very interesting. So let's finish off with the question I ask every single guest who comes on to Logtech Live. Who is your favorite musician or band? And you have to tell me why.
Yeah. I struggle with this because I don't really have a fave. So I had to think about who's kind of my go-to, right? Where I listen to, I find at least once a week, Tribe Called Quest. Like there's never a time of day that's not good for Tribe. And it's just, I don't know, it just immediately, it's like low energy, but the right energy. And, yeah.
All right. There's been a lot of great suggestions, but I have to say that's the winner of all the people because I totally agree with you. There's never a time where I like don't automatically gravitate. I'm such a dinosaur now. Like there's points where I realize I've not listened to. There will be like weeks that go by where I haven't listened to anything that was recorded after like 2000. So I'm fully endorsed. Great suggestion. Are you a Low End Theory or Midnight Marauders?
Low End Theory. Yeah.
All right, good. I it's so close, but I agree. Midnight Marauders. I mean, Low End Theory is the best. So, Heidi, amazing discussion. I could have asked you a million more things, but
I know there's so much to talk about.
There's so much. So we'll have to do. I always say this now because my guests are always so great, but we have to do a part 2 at some point, or maybe at a Journal of Commerce event coming soon. Thank you so much for making time today, and hope how can people reach out to you or Infor Nexus?
Yeah, so infornexus.com, and you can reach out to me, Heidi Benko, on LinkedIn, and be great to connect.
Cool. Thanks so much for joining us. Talk to you soon. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.
All right, awesome discussion. Heidi's great. Wanted to say hello and thank you to Jovan from North Macedonia, Benaisa, I hope I'm not butchering that, from Morocco, and Allison from Brazil. so cool to have people chiming in and tuning in from all these far-flung parts of the world. I'm also in a far-flung part of the world right now, so really cool how this can become a community that connects people from all over the world. So before we go, you wait for it every year or every episode, I should say. It's dad joke of the week time. What does a flower say when it's done something wrong? I'll give you a second. Oopsie daisy. That's another contribution from my son. I just go, hey, I need a dad joke for the week. He goes, here's one. It's crazy how, I guess when you don't have a job, you just have time to think of dad jokes all day long. But I sort of like that one. So even though we're not in spring anymore, now everything's dying off from the heat. So in any case, I digress. It's time for you all to get back to work. Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Logtech Live. We will be back. Oh, Richard from Ghana just tuned in to add another awesome place to our listener map. Anyway, it's time to go. Someone own the blended pledge. If you can't own it, contribute to it at least. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another awesome episode. I have a great guest lined up in 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and have a great weekend, everyone, wherever you may be.